Hi everybody and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to show you the whole process of a watercolor drawing from the very first sketch to the final piece. I am going to be painting this little lady. At first I drew her in my sketchbook, and when I don't know what to draw, I sometimes go back to my sketches and get some more ideas for my paintings. First, let's gather some materials. So today I'm going to be using Fabriano's watercolor paper. This paper is hot pressed, which means it's really smooth and easy to add details to, instead of having the texture you usually get with cold pressed watercolor paper. You can see that even when washing and bleeding colors, they stay quite neat and tidy, and separating colors can create really smooth lines, so it is a good paper for precision painting. As I'll be using some watercolored pencils for detail, this is perfect for me. I tend to prefer pans to tubes, and these watercolors are specially pigmented. They are Windsor & Newton professional watercolor pans. As you can see, I'm not as careful and clean as I should be with them, but it works for me. I will also use white gouache for highlights and details. Honestly, any brand will do, so I use pretty inexpensive ones. Gouaches are thicker than watercolors and more matte, which means you can easily add details on top of even the darkest colors, which you can't really do with watercolors. I'm also going to be using a selection of paintbrushes for different purposes. These oval Filbert paintbrushes are really soft and perfect for large areas, especially for backgrounds, as they blend really well. I bought these in China, but you can easily find similar ones in any art shop. When selecting paintbrushes for watercolor, make sure you always have some really soft ones for washes and some stiffer ones for detail. These ones, for example, were a really good find. I got them for €1 or something in Continent, which is a big supermarket, and they work really well. Finally, I'll be using watercolor pencils to add some finer details. I like using watercolor Caran ones, but there really isn't a right or wrong. If you prefer waxy coloring pencils, go for it. So the first thing I'm going to do, and which should always be your first concern, is the background. I've added water wash to the areas I want to paint. This should be a glaze, not a puddle of water. I then focus on each area at a time, adding the lighter color, then the darkest on the edges, and simply letting them blend together. I might give it a little help every now and then, but the joy of watercolor really is to let control go a little bit and just embrace whatever happens. Try to always start with a background and then work your way to the foreground, as it will really make a massive difference to the depth of your piece. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of purple for flavor, and finally some splattering here and there. You won't see much of it later, but it will just give you a little bit of implied texture. There's a little droplet there in the face, which is a mistake, so I'm going to go ahead and mop it up with a piece of tissue and try to hide it in the layers later. Now I'm adding another wash with the base color for the skin and start adding some darker areas. I'm mainly going from the lighter to the darker shadows by again applying the color where it will be darkest, and then blending the edges with a little water. It's important to have just a little bit on the paintbrush. I don't want to add water to it, just kind of a glaze again. Now I'm going to need a little bit more control in some areas, which is where my stiffer, springier paintbrushes come in. I'm also using it to add a red blush to some areas, which creates a more natural look and a little bit more three-dimensionality. Mistake number one that students make when adding red is to add it where they think it belongs, so in the cheeks, when in reality you will notice a lot of areas on the face have a more reddish tint. That sort of detail can help you make even made-up characters like this one look more natural. These darkest areas can also sometimes make a person look like they've been punched in the face, but you have to remember that at this point, color is scarce. And once you add the shadows to the other areas, it will start to look more together. On the hair I use 3 layers, letting the previous one dry each time to ensure that the texture of the hair stays where I want it. I'm not going to just let it dry either. You need to be efficient, and for that you need to plan where you're going to go next, so that you are always painting areas that are not adjacent to each other, so they don't blend without you wanting it, but also so that you're not wasting time. In some areas I'm also going to add a little bit of the purple flavor, just some wet on wet, blending here and there to make it more interesting. I wanted this particular piece to look quite atmospheric, so I chose a harmonious colour palette of analogous colours, using black only on details and where I want it to be really dark. At this stage my tissue is looking really manky and it's definitely not going to take any more water, so I'm going to change it for a clean one so that I don't contaminate my paintbrush with other colours. Don't just get a tiny bit either, you should use enough to take a fair amount of water. Again, for the really dark tones and for the detail I need to have a lot of control, so I'm going to go again with my springy synthetic brush to ensure that I can control exactly where my colours go. Use the very tip of your paintbrush to add finer detail, and remember to point the tip of your brush towards the outline of the shape so you can see exactly what you're doing. Don't be afraid to rotate your work as much as you need, and if you are going to tape it down, do it on a spare piece of wooden board or ensure that there's plenty of space around the table for you to move around. Don't rush the smaller areas, take your time so that you are less likely to make mistakes. So this area is still not as good as I want. There are a lot of mistakes and areas that are not as homogeneous as I'd like. And now that the background is dry, it's the perfect time for me to correct it. I still went a little bit overboard on the top right corner there. So again, I'm going to let it dry for a bit before trying to correct it. Otherwise, I might start damaging the paper. It's much easier to correct these mistakes when using darker color, but that's also why you should always look on a lightish layer so that if you make a mistake, it's much easier to tackle. This is probably my favorite thing to do on watercolor paintings, adding the details with coloring pencil. Up to here, you kind of have to use your imagination to see how well it's going, but all of a sudden things start to pop out and gain definition. The butterfly looks really cute too, but because it has so much more detail than everything else, it kind of looks a little bit out of place. I'm making the drawing look more together by adding a little bit of pattern to the sash and to the hairband, inspired by the wings of the butterfly. Looking back at it, it also seems obvious that the chin isn't quite right, so remember to step back from your drawing or ask a friend to give you some feedback, and don't be afraid to correct what needs to be corrected. After some last minute details, it's time to cut around the drawing and see the product of the last 2 hours' work. Overall, I think it looks really cute and atmospheric, so I'm pretty happy with it. I could have worked on this for many more hours, but it's really important to do exercises like this to learn to stick to deadlines and work efficiently. Well, I hope that was helpful and that you enjoyed it. Good luck in your own art, and let me know if there's anything specific you'd like me to do a video about. See you later!